China issues a stark warning to Taiwan at Beijing's annual two-sessions meeting.
台独分子闹得越欢，脖子上的绳索就会勒得越紧。
In first place, the next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney.
Canada's ruling party elects its new leader and the country's next prime minister. Japanese survivors of history's deadliest bombing recount the night that changed their lives 80 years ago. Plus, we speak to the former director of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's office in D.C., an Italian-American from Brooklyn, New York. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. A new warning to Taiwan as Beijing threatens action against what it calls separatism. China's defense ministry made the statement at the two sessions, the country's largest annual political meeting. Louise Watt reports.
While Beijing's main focus at the moment is how to stop its economic slowdown, it's also talking Taiwan, both carrots and sticks. While Taiwan says only its 23 million people can decide its future, China's military says it is a force to promote unification between the two sides, and had a warning to Taiwan's ruling party.
台独分子闹得越欢，脖子上的绳索就会勒得越紧，头顶上的利剑就会愈加锋利。我们正告民进党当局，悬崖勒马，回头是岸，执迷不悟，死路一条。
Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council said they had no comment on the spokesperson's words. The warning and even the colourful language from Beijing isn't new, but it comes as China says it wants to attract Taiwanese investment and workers. Again, not a new approach, but one it hopes will lead to a more positive view of Beijing among Taiwanese. Chris Ma, Klein Wong and Louise Watt in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
For more on what's taken place at China's two sessions and where Beijing stands diplomatically, Alec MacDonald spoke to Jia Yenzong at the National University of Singapore.
What have been some of the key items which have stood out to you at this year's two sessions?
So I think the two sessions primarily focus on boosting the PRC's economy. So a lot of this has to do with consumption. Some of it also has to do with trying to boost production. But I guess the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so we'll have to see whether these moves actually work. They've been tried before the past few years with very limited results.
As China continues to face deflationary pressure, what items has the two sessions talked about to improve consumer confidence?
Some of the what looks like fiscal stimuli intends to sort of get more confidence in the economy through government spending, and hopefully that will trickle down and have consumers spend more. But I think ultimately the PRC economy probably needs more structural change than that.
As we see that this current environment is changing, specifically with the uncertainty around U.S. foreign policy, is there anything more that Beijing or the PLA can do right now regarding Taiwan, regarding their view of Taiwan?
So I actually think that the PRC is trying to test the limits of where U.S. policy might be. So this is not just with regard to Taiwan. Sure, there are the military exercises around Taiwan. There was the live fire exercise. But we've also seen them in the Yellow Sea. We've seen them more robust PLA activity in the East China Sea, in the South China Sea, and also the exercises and circumvention of Australia, so exercises off Australia and the circumvention of Australia. So, they're trying to see where U.S. alliances and partnerships stand and what they can possibly get around. So it's not just Taiwan. I think also what is interesting is in terms of the PRC and the PLA's position, they don't seem to be offering anything new.
Do you think that the PRC might take a more aggressive diplomatic stance then in the near future, or it might take a more tactful diplomatic stance?
So I think what was what was quite interesting for me that came out of two sessions. One was a statement about how if Taiwan continues to hold out, the sort of offers of autonomy will be taken away. Well, that just suggests that Beijing can rescind whatever promises it makes at any point in time, which brings further questions about this commitment. That doesn't, I think, in my mind, make Beijing's offer more attractive. Then there's this other thing about Beijing trying to push forward on its claims about UN Resolution, General Assembly Resolution 2758, saying that the Beijing's reading is that it puts Taiwan under PRC control, but there's no mention of Taiwan in the text. Now, what's interesting about it is as the PRC tries to push against the text of UNGA Resolution 2758, as it tries to push against UNCLOS, what it's in effect doing is weakening the sort of body of international laws and regimes that currently sort of help hold the international system in place. That may open the way for much more. That may open the way for more efforts by major powers to push their way around. That's not just the PRC. That can result, therefore, in a much more contentious environment for everybody, including Beijing.
That was Jiayan Zong, professor at the National University of Singapore. Canada's ruling Liberal Party has elected a new leader and prime minister. Mark Carney, a former governor of the country's central bank, now faces a looming trade war with the U.S. and threats of annexation by its president. Chelsea Wu has more.
Mark Carney with 100.
A landslide victory as Mark Carney wins the race to become Canada's next prime minister. The former central bank governor's win marks a fresh start for the ruling Liberal Party.
My government will put into action our plan to build a stronger economy, to create new trading relationships with reliable trading partners, and to secure our borders.
Carney will replace Justin Trudeau, who once announced he was stepping down in January. Trudeau has held the position for nearly a decade, but has become deeply unpopular in recent years. Unlike most prime minister hopefuls, Carney has never held public office. As central bank governor, he steered Canada through the 2008 global financial crisis. In 2013, he became the first non-citizen to head the Bank of England. Now, as he prepares to assume office, he will also need to lead Canada through one of its toughest economic challenges yet, an escalating trade war with its biggest trading partner, the United States, and threats by its president, Donald Trump, to annex the country.
Donald Trump, as we know, has put, as the Prime Minister just said, unjustified tariffs on what we build, on what we sell, on how we make a living. He's attacking Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot let him succeed.
Canada's economy relies heavily on the U.S., though Trump has backed off somewhat on tariffs against Canada, in particular those for automobiles. They could cause a recession if fully imposed. Carney has vowed to keep the tariffs slapped on U.S. imports in response, and further secure Canada's borders. But the opposition Conservatives are not convinced a new prime minister is enough to get Canada through the rough waters ahead. The party has been highly critical of Justin Trudeau's leadership amid rising food housing costs and increased immigration.
My friends, it is not realistic that we would believe a party 60 days before election suddenly reversing itself on absolutely everything. If you want conservative policies, you will have to vote conservative.
With national elections scheduled for late October, Canadians will once again be faced with a choice of who to lead the country. And as polling results show a tightening race between the two major parties, voters must decide who they think is best fit to manage relations with an increasingly unpredictable neighbor. James Lin and Chelsea Wu for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan-U.S. ties will only get stronger under Donald Trump, says the top U.S. envoy in Taiwan, Raymond Greene. Speaking to local Liberty Times newspaper, Greene says he expects Washington to double down on supporting Taiwan's self-defense and boost already strong trade ties. Greene says Taiwan is the U.S.'s 7th largest trading partner, and there's room for supply chains to grow stronger and more resilient. But he also said he hopes Taiwan's partisan legislature can come together to increase Taiwan's defense budget and for the country to stabilize its energy supply. Taiwan People's Party founder Ko Wen-je has attended his father's funeral. He was allowed out of detention to go to the ceremony. Ko arrived under guard and left after less than an hour. He's being investigated for several corruption charges and has been held incommunicado for months. Several high-profile political figures attended the ceremony, including former Presidents Ma Ying-jeou and Chen Shui-bian. Ko's father died in February. In March 1945, as World War II was drawing to a close, the United States firebombed Tokyo. 80 years later, survivors look back and wonder if the world has learned anything from the deadliest single night in history's largest war. Bryn Thomas reports.
In the Pacific, the ruthless air war is continued against Japan. Another Tokyo raid is briefed at the huge superfortress base of Saipan. From the Marianas, 1,500 miles northward over the Pacific, flies this great armada on what has become almost a daily mission.
幼稚園に通ってました。幼稚園もしょっちゅう空襲警報が鳴って、ほとんど毎日帰ってくる。
The United States Army Air Forces conducted around 60 bombing raids over Tokyo during World War II. But it was the firebombings that took place 80 years ago, between March 9th and 10th, 1945, that left the deepest scars on the city.
その時に私たちは遠くにいましたから、そんな詳しい経過はわからないんですけれども、ズボッってね、爆弾が落ちるのがわかるわけですよ。
The raids were the deadliest in history, with immediate deaths surpassing each of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 5 months later. Nishio Shizuko was celebrating her 6th birthday at the time. 80 years later, she considers herself among the lucky ones.
話によればですけれど、クラスメートが20人いたと。で、その3月10日の空襲で、私以外は全員いなくなった。
They were among the more than 100,000 killed in the firestorm that consumed a quarter of Tokyo, 42 square kilometers on a single night. Allied bombers first used high explosives to turn Japan's paper and wood cities into kindling, then dropped incendiaries to ignite them. The blaze it created sucked air from lungs and cooked people alive inside their shelters.
ドアの前にはですね、数時間前までドア開けてください、中に入れてくださいっていう方たちが真っ黒に焼け焦げて、まるで人間の丸太のようになってドアの前にもうドアよりはるか上まで山のように積まれていたんですね。
Before the Tokyo firebombings, the Americans had been unsuccessfully trying to target Japan's factories and war economy.
Tokyo, 20,000 feet below. The planes cruise steadily, making sure of military objectives, making absolutely certain that every ton of high explosive will count.
The March 1945 raids reflected the brutal logic of total war. Allied planners, led by General Curtis LeMay, saw Japan's residential areas as part of its war economy. Small workshops produced materials, and their residents worked in them, making entire neighborhoods targets.
怖くて怖くてしょうがなくて出てしまったんですよ、外へ。で、空を見上げたら、いやー、向こうの方がすごい燃えてるって思ったのが、それが浅草方面だったわけですね。
80 years later, the March 1945 raids on Tokyo are often remembered as yet another atrocity in a war full of them. For the few still alive who lived through it, the terror of that night is coupled with the fear that nearly a century later, the world has failed to learn from it.
で、ウクライナのこともあるので、先行き分かりませんよね。全く同じことが起きないとも限らないと私は思っていますので。
Devin Tsai and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up after the break. Violence in Syria leaves hundreds dead as government forces clash with loyalists of the toppled Assad regime.
For more news from Taiwan and around the world, download our app or check out the TaiwanPlus website. Ready? Go.
Ready.
Just jump.
Okay, jump!
Welcome back. You're watching Taiwan Plus News. The U.S. and Russia have asked for the UN Security Council to meet behind closed doors on Monday over the escalating violence in Syria. As many as 1,000 people, including civilians, are believed to have been killed in days of fighting between forces loyal to former President Bashar al-Assad and those belonging to the new government. John Van Trieste reports.
Calm returns to the Syrian city of Latakia after violence that left hundreds of people dead. Shops have reopened and street vendors are back to work, though armed guards remain on the streets checking the IDs of passing motorists. The question now is whether this peace will hold. Located on Syria's Mediterranean coast, Latakia is one of the few remaining pockets of support for former President Bashar al-Assad, who was ousted in December 2024. Not only does the Assad family trace its roots to this part of the country, but the coastal strip is also the home of the Assad family's religion, followers of a minority form of Islam called Alawites. When some of these Assad backers attacked government forces Thursday, it set off a wave of revenge killings in coastal regions like Latakia by supporters of Syria's new government. Though Alawites may have been the target, the bullets were indiscriminate. 20-year-old medical student Shinda Kisho came from a completely different minority, the Syrian Kurds. She was killed by gunfire while sleeping in bed as fighting broke out around her home. Now, her family are left to process their shock and grief.
خودی یعنی نظام رحمت دلی وانات نبو درکت خوای نا درکت جیب هوار کر انو وای فیشک هاتن مالی کتن اوید نغم ماوانا داکت انو جرگو گوور و اسعاف کن دکنیان يعني تشكي إنسانية في إجار شي قبولناك.
Syria's acting president says the attackers will be hunted down and those who've committed violence on both sides will face consequences. He's also calling for unity.
أننا لن نتسامح مع فلول النظام الساقط الذين قاموا بارتكاب الجرائم ضد قوات جيشنا ومؤسسات الدولة. فليس أمام هؤلاء سوى خيار واحد وهو تسليم أنفسهم للقانون فوراً.
But the risk of more deaths isn't over, with security forces still on alert. Government forces think around 5,000 pro-Assad insurgents are hiding out in mountains nearby. It's a big blow to hopes for peace in a country that's already been traumatized from 13 years of civil war. In Latakia, relief at the end of the fighting is mixed with sorrow and unease.
من 4 أيام لليوم بعض عصابات مجموعات فلول قديمة كلياتها شركت على الوضع كلياته بهذا البلد، خربت الدنيا على العالم كلياته. لا هلا الحمد لله امبارح واليوم الوضع كثير تمام.
يلي صار هو شيء كثير مؤلم وبنفس الوقت يعني كان شيء كثير قاهر على الشعب السوري أجمع. الله يرحم جميع الشهداء.
Even as life returns to normal, exiled President Bashar al-Assad's influence still lingers in this part of Syria. How the central government handles this reality will be crucial to the country's future stability. Kamashu and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
North Korea has fired multiple ballistic missiles off its west coast, according to South Korea's military. It comes as the U.S. and South Korea begin the annual Freedom Shield drills aimed at strengthening cooperation between their two countries. North Korea has slammed these drills as a dangerous, provocative act. State media from North Korea warns that this year's drills could escalate tensions and risk conflict through accidental shootings. Set to run through March 20th, live-fire exercises for this year's drill have been suspended after South Korean jets mistakenly bombed a civilian area, wounding 29 people. North Korean hackers have successfully laundered $300 million of stolen cryptocurrency. In late February, hackers from North Korea's Lazarus Group used automated tools to heist a record-breaking $1.5 billion from the exchange Bybit. Investigators tracking the funds say 20% of that has gone dark, meaning it's now unrecoverable. The U.S. and its allies accuse North Korea of using these stolen funds to finance its military and nuclear programs. An Italian-American is an unlikely candidate to work for Taiwan's ruling political party, but that's exactly who the Democratic Progressive Party had running its office in Washington, D.C. for over a decade. In this special report from the U.S. Capitol, I speak to Mike Fonte, whose close links with Taiwan began when he moved to the country as a missionary in the 1960s.
Taiwan.
Italian-American Michael Fonte speaks one of Taiwan's native languages. He's fluent in Taiwanese Daiki, known by some as Holowe.
That's me studying Holowe, 1967, in Taitung, Samin Law.
Fonte learned it working as a Roman Catholic missionary in central Taiwan back in the 1960s. From those beginnings, Fonte would go on to become a prominent figure in Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party. He's good friends with former President Tsai Ing-wen and current Vice President Bi Khim-hsiao.
She's really a very warm person. You might not see that in action unless you got to know her well. So I consider her a real friend. I think she considers me a friend as well.
His house is decorated with honors and letters given to him by President Lai Ching-te and former Foreign Minister Joseph Wu. But Fonte's name doesn't make headlines in Taiwan because he's mostly been in the United States, working for the DPP in Washington, D.C. How did Fonte land that job? Well, he left Taiwan in 1970 after realizing that the social justice work he wanted to do just wasn't viable under Taiwan's authoritarian government at the time, which had imposed martial law.
I mean, one of my problems that I had when I was there was that the Roman Catholic hierarchy was not willing to see us do anything that would upset the government. Okay,
Fonte then pursued an Asian Studies degree at the University of Michigan, where he met leading Taiwanese democracy activists Peng Mingmin and Lin Zhongyi.
This one I really treasure because the woman I mentioned to you, who was Lin Zhongyi's daughter, Hyuk-bun, gave it to me.
Taiwanese Dai was at the time perceived as the language of the dissident community, and Fonte's proficiency helped him become a conduit for democracy activist exiles in the U.S.
I know it was considered a bit of an irritant that we were studying Taiwanese, we were speaking Taiwanese, still an awful lot of nervousness on the KMT side about these people going to rise up.
Here we go. This is hard.
After a few years in California, Fonte reconnected with Peng Mingmin in Washington in 1986, the same year the DPP was officially founded. Shortly thereafter, U.S. NGO, the National Democratic Institute, invited the party to Washington.
So Peng said to me, go be their gopher, take them around. So I did that, and I got to know all the founders. That's where I met Choi Ren, all the other people, Saljin Zhong, people like that.
Cho and Su, leading DPP figures who went on to take government positions in the 2000s, helping the party expand its presence abroad.
I worked for 10 years as a consultant with Bi Kim and Choi Ren. There was a DPP mission here from 1995 to 2000. Bi Kim was actually in charge of it for a while.
And when the DPP reopened its U.S. mission in 2013, the party tapped Fonte as the office's director. Bi Khim-hsiao, now the country's vice president, had gone on to become a legislator in Taiwan, and Fonte was a staunch friend of the party.
I speak English. I know the Washington scene fairly well. I've got my degree in Asian studies, whatever the hell. It all worked together to make me a viable candidate at that point.
Fonte was the perfect go-between for the DPP and U.S. policymakers.
Our job is to be as honest as we can with the DPP about what we're hearing here about policy from a variety of sources, mostly from the government in power here, but also the opposition as well.
Fonte has since passed the torch as DPP's Washington director, but his love for Taiwan is still very much a part of him.
I'm Italian-American, and when I got to Taiwan, I realized family, food, and friends, right? It's the same for Taiwanese, it's the same for Italians. So it's very easy to feel part of that culture and make a lot of good friends.
From Brooklyn, New York, to the farms of central Taiwan, to Washington, D.C., Michael Fonte probably never imagined that his early years as a missionary would spark a career in politics. And the Democratic Progressive Party probably never thought that one of its biggest overseas champions would be an Italian-American fluent in Tai. Leon Lien, Laurel Stewart, and Leslie Liao in Washington, D.C. for TaiwanPlus. And thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, check out these highlights from a drag queen competition in Spain, part of carnival celebrations on the country's Gran Canary Island. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.